Married by obligation, Millionaire only realized he loved her when his best friend fell for her too. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew this day would come, but she never imagined it would feel like stepping into her own grave. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Brooks family home, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors that Simone had walked 1,000 times before. Today, however, each step felt foreign, as if she were moving through someone else's life. Simone Biles stood before her bedroom mirror, her reflection showing a woman she barely recognized. At 27, she possessed a natural elegance that no amount of wealth could buy. Her rich, dark skin seemed to glow in the soft morning light, and her hair was styled in an intricate updo that framed her face perfectly. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that hugged her curves tastefully, chosen not for a celebration, but for a transaction. Her mother's voice echoed from downstairs, calling her name with a forced cheerfulness that made Simone's stomach turn. Today was her wedding day, though it felt more like a funeral for the life she'd always imagined for herself. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," her mother Grace whispered as she entered the room. Her eyes held a mixture of pride and guilt that had been there for weeks. He's a good man, Simone. This will work out for everyone." Simone turned away from the mirror, her dark eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. "Everyone except me, Mama." Grace's face crumpled slightly. "Baby, you know we didn't have a choice. Your father's business, the debts. The Henderson family is offering us a way out, a way to save everything we've worked for, by selling me, by giving you a future with one of the most successful men in the country." Grace's voice grew firmer, the maternal instinct to protect warring with the harsh reality they faced. "Jordan Henderson isn't just wealthy, honey. He's educated, respected, and he doesn't want to marry me any more than I want to marry him." Simone's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her earrings. "This is business, Mama. Let's not pretend it's anything more." The drive to the Henderson estate was silent, except for the soft hum of the engine and the rustling of Simone's dress against the leather seats. She watched the suburbs give way to increasingly expensive neighborhoods, each house larger and more imposing than the last, until they reached the gates of what would now be her home. The Henderson mansion stood like a monument to old money and older traditions. Its stone facade and perfectly manicured gardens spoke of generations of wealth and influence. Simone felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the October air. Inside, the ceremony was small and sterile. A handful of family members and close friends sat in the spacious living room that had been converted into a makeshift chapel. The justice of the peace waited patiently by the fireplace, his weathered hands holding the book that would bind her to a stranger. And then she saw him. Jordan Henderson stood near the windows, his broad shoulders outlined against the afternoon light. At 35, he commanded attention without trying. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and his piercing blue eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore a charcoal grey suit that fit him like it had been crafted by angels, and when he turned to look at her, she understood why women threw themselves at his feet. But his eyes, they were cold, professional, like he was attending a board meeting rather than his own wedding. Their gazes met across the room, and for a moment time seemed suspended. She saw him take in her appearance, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, a curt acknowledgement that this was happening, whether either of them wanted it or not. The ceremony passed in a blur of words that felt meaningless. "Do you, Jordan, take Simone? Do you, Simone, take Jordan?" The rings slid onto their fingers like shackles disguised as jewelry. When the justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, Jordan leaned down to kiss her cheek, a brief, polite gesture that held all the warmth of a business handshake. His lips barely brushed her skin, but she caught the faint scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her heart race despite herself. The reception was equally formal. Guests made polite conversation over champagne and catered hors d'oeuvres. Speaking in the careful tones people used when everyone was pretending something tragic was actually wonderful. Simone found herself standing alone on the terrace, watching the sun set over gardens that now belonged to her as much as they belonged to anyone. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was surrounded by more luxury than she'd ever dreamed of, yet felt more alone than she ever had in her life. Second thoughts. She turned to find Jordan behind her, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. Up close, he was even more imposing. tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, with the kind of presence that filled a room. "Would it matter if I did?" she asked, accepting the glass he offered. "No," he said simply, "but I appreciate honesty." They stood in silence for a moment, both looking out at the gardens rather than at each other. The wedding guests' laughter drifted out from inside, a sound that felt worlds away from where they stood. "I want you to know," Jordan said finally, his voice low and measured, "this doesn't have to be complicated. I have my life, you'll have yours. We'll fulfill our obligations to our families, and after a reasonable amount of time, we can discuss other arrangements." Simone felt something cold settle in her chest. Other arrangements? He turned to look at her then, his blue eyes meeting her dark ones with brutal honesty. "I don't believe in love, Simone. I believe in contracts, mutual benefit, and clear expectations. This marriage gives your family financial security and gives mine the stability my father needs during his illness. Beyond that," he shrugged, the gesture somehow making his expensive suit look even more perfect. "Beyond that, we're strangers who happen to share a last name now." Simone nodded slowly, though something inside her chest felt like it was breaking. She'd expected this, hadn't she? Known from the beginning that this was a business transaction, so why did hearing him say it out loud hurt so much? "I understand," she said quietly. Jordan studied her face for a long moment, something flickering in his expression that she couldn't quite read. Then he raised his glass in a mock toast. "To mutual benefit," he said. "To mutual benefit," she echoed, though the words tasted like ashes in her mouth. As they clinked glasses, Simone couldn't shake the feeling that she was toasting the death of dreams she'd never even realized she'd been holding on to. But what neither of them knew was that some contracts are written in invisible ink, and some obligations have a way of becoming something else entirely. The silence in the Henderson mansion wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, and Simone had learned to navigate the vast corridors of her new home like a ghost. She'd mapped out Jordan's schedule with military precision. He left for his downtown office at exactly 7:30 a.m. and rarely returned before 9 p.m. This gave her nearly 14 hours of solitude in a house that felt more like an elegant museum than a home. She'd claimed the library as her sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound classics and contemporary novels that someone, presumably Jordan's late mother, had collected over the years. It was here that Simone spent most of her days, curled up in an oversized armchair by the window, reading and watching the gardeners tend to the perfect landscape outside. The household staff, Maria, the housekeeper, and Thomas, the groundskeeper, were kind but maintained a professional distance. They seemed as uncertain about her role in the house as she was. Was she the lady of the manor, a temporary guest? Jordan had given no instructions about how she should be treated, leaving everyone in an uncomfortable limbo. On this particular Thursday morning, Simone was surprised to find Jordan still in the kitchen when she came down for breakfast. He stood at the marble island, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, his attention focused on his phone while Maria prepared his coffee. "Good morning," Simone said softly, not wanting to startle him. Jordan looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to his phone. "Morning," he replied, his tone neutral and professional. She poured herself coffee from the expensive machine, aware of his presence in her peripheral vision. He was devastatingly handsome in the morning light streaming through the kitchen's French doors, his dark hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She wondered if he ever looked anything less than perfect, if there was ever a moment when the mask slipped. "I won't be home for dinner tonight," he said without looking up. "Board meeting running late." "Okay," she replied, though she realized he wasn't really asking permission or even informing her out of consideration. It was more like he was updating his calendar out loud. Maria bustled around them, preparing a breakfast that Jordan would probably ignore in favor of whatever corporate meeting was demanding his attention. The housekeeper, a warm woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes, had tried several times to engage Simone in conversations about meal preferences and household routines, but even those interactions felt awkward without knowing Jordan's expectations. "Mrs. Henderson," Maria said hesitantly, "I was wondering about the master bedroom suite. Should I prepare it for—" "No," Jordan cut in sharply, finally looking up from his phone. "Mrs. Henderson is comfortable in the guest wing." The words hit Simone like a physical blow, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Henderson. He couldn't even use her first name, and the way he said it made it clear that while she might legally bear his name, she wasn't really his wife in any meaningful sense. Maria's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Of course, Mr. Henderson. I just thought, the current arrangement is fine, Jordan said, his tone brooking no further discussion. He grabbed his coffee and briefcase, pausing only to check his watch. I'll be in Seattle tomorrow for the Morrison acquisition, back Sunday evening. And then he was gone, leaving Simone standing in the kitchen with Maria, both women processing the awkwardness of the exchange. I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson, Maria whispered, once the front door closed. I didn't mean to overstep. You didn't, Simone assured her, forcing a smile. And please call me Simone. Mrs. Henderson is... She trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Mrs. Henderson was Jordan's mother, dead 5 years now. Mrs. Henderson was supposed to be a wife, not a stranger living in the guest wing of her own house. Simone, Maria repeated with a gentle smile. Would you like me to prepare breakfast? Maybe those blueberry pancakes you mentioned liking? That sounds wonderful. As Maria moved around the kitchen, Simone found herself thinking about the brief exchange with Jordan. In 3 weeks of marriage, their conversations had been limited to logistics, dinner times, travel schedules, social obligations. They moved around each other like polite strangers sharing temporary accommodations. But she'd caught something in his eyes this morning when Maria asked about the master bedroom. A flicker of, what? Discomfort? Guilt? It had passed so quickly she might have imagined it. The day stretched ahead of her, empty as always. She'd read 2 novels this week, reorganized her small collection of belongings twice, and taken enough walks around the grounds to know every flower in every garden bed. The luxury that surrounded her felt increasingly like a beautiful prison. After breakfast, she decided to venture into parts of the house she hadn't explored yet. The Henderson mansion was old enough to have character, built in the 1940s by Jordan's grandfather, and updated over the decades to blend classic architecture with modern conveniences. She found herself in what appeared to be Jordan's home office, though it was clearly unused. Unlike his downtown headquarters, this space felt personal. Family photos lined one wall. Jordan with an older man who must be his father. A formal portrait of a beautiful blonde woman who had his eyes, pictures from his Harvard graduation. One photo caught her attention. A younger Jordan, maybe in his early 20s, laughing on what looked like a boat. His arm was slung around another young man with sandy hair and an easy smile. They both looked carefree in a way that seemed impossible when she thought of the controlled, distant man she'd married. That's Liam Carter. Simone spun around to find Jordan standing in the doorway, having apparently returned for something he'd forgotten. His expression was unreadable as he watched her examining his personal space. I'm sorry, she said quickly, stepping away from the photos. I was just... It's your house too, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. He moved to his desk, retrieving a file folder with practiced efficiency. Liam's my oldest friend. We grew up together. He looks nice, Simone offered, not sure what else to say. He is. Jordan's voice softened almost imperceptibly. He's been traveling in Europe for the past 2 years. Art galleries, museums, that sort of thing. His family has money, but no expectations. Unlike mine. It was the most personal thing he'd ever shared with her, and Simone found herself curious about this friend who could make the stoic Jordan Henderson sound almost wistful. When will he be back? Jordan paused in gathering his papers, something shifting in his expression. Actually, he's coming home next week. My father wants to meet you properly. We're having a family dinner Saturday. He looked at her directly for the first time since entering the room. I trust that won't be a problem. Of course not. He nodded curtly and headed for the door, then stopped. Simone. The sound of her name on his lips made her breath catch. It was the first time he'd used it since their wedding day. Yes? Don't feel like you have to hide in the library all day. This is your home now. Before she could respond, he was gone again, leaving her standing among his family photos, with her heart racing for reasons she couldn't quite name. But as she looked back at the photo of Jordan and Liam, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what that might mean. She wasn't prepared for the way her heart would skip when she heard genuine laughter echoing through the halls of the Henderson mansion. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Simone had spent the entire day preparing for the family dinner, not just choosing her outfit, but mentally rehearsing conversations and trying to calm the nervous energy that had been building since Jordan's announcement. She'd selected a deep emerald dress that complemented her skin tone beautifully, its elegant cut striking the perfect balance between sophisticated and approachable. Her hair was styled in soft waves that framed her face, and she'd chosen jewelry that was noticeable without being ostentatious. Looking in the mirror, she felt confident for the first time since moving into the mansion. The Henderson family dining room was a testament to old money elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the mahogany table that could easily seat 12, though tonight it was set for only 5. Jordan's father, William Henderson, sat at the head of the table in his wheelchair, his once powerful frame diminished by illness, but his sharp blue eyes, so like his son's, still commanding respect. "Simone, my dear," William said warmly as she entered the room, "you look absolutely radiant. That color suits you perfectly." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," she replied, grateful for his kindness. In the month since the wedding, William had been nothing but gracious to her, treating her with a respect that his son seemed incapable of showing. Jordan stood near the fireplace, impeccable as always in a charcoal suit, but there was something different about his posture tonight. He seemed lighter somehow, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "Dad, I'd like you to meet my wife, Simone," came a voice from the doorway, followed by rich, genuine laughter. Simone turned to see the sandy-haired man from the photograph stepping into the room, but seeing Liam Carter in person was entirely different from seeing him in a picture. He had the kind of presence that filled a space with warmth, the kind of smile that made you want to smile back, even if you'd been having the worst day of your life. "Actually, Dad," Jordan said with what might have been amusement, "this is Liam, the one who's been gallivanting across Europe while the rest of us have been working." "Gallivanting?" Liam feigned offense, his green eyes twinkling with mischief. "I'll have you know I've been conducting very serious cultural research. Did you know that Parisians put butter on everything?" "Everything, Jordan." It was a revelation that required months of investigation. William Henderson laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise everyone in the room, including himself. "Welcome home, son," he said warmly. "We've missed your ridiculous stories." But Liam's attention had shifted to Simone, and his expression grew genuinely curious and kind. "And you must be the remarkable woman who convinced this workaholic to take a break long enough to get married." The comment hung in the air awkwardly, given that everyone in the room knew the true nature of the marriage, but Liam's delivery was so naturally charming that it somehow didn't feel uncomfortable. "Simone," she said simply, extending her hand. Instead of shaking it, Liam took her hand gently and kissed it in an old-fashioned gesture that should have seemed ridiculous, but instead felt sweetly sincere. "Enchanté, madame. Though I have to say, Jordan's description didn't do you justice." Simone felt her cheeks warm. "Jordan described me?" "Extensively," Liam said with a grin, ignoring the sharp look Jordan shot him. "All business, of course, very proper, very contractual." "Liam," Jordan's voice carried a warning. "What?" "I'm just saying that seeing you two together, the chemistry is non-existent," Jordan cut in coolly. "As we've discussed." The room fell silent, except for the soft clinking of crystal as Maria finished setting the wine glasses. Simone felt her face burn with embarrassment, not just at Jordan's words, but at the fact that he'd apparently been discussing their marriage arrangement with his friend. William cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should sit down for dinner." The meal that followed was a study in contrasts. William regaled them with stories from his younger days, building the Henderson financial empire, his eyes bright with the memory of challenges conquered and deals closed. Liam entertained them with tales from his European adventures, the time he got lost in the Louvre for 6 hours, his failed attempt to learn Italian from a gondolier in Venice, his discovery of a tiny cafe in Prague that served the most perfect coffee he'd ever tasted. Throughout it all, Jordan remained largely silent, responding when directly addressed, but otherwise watching the interactions with the same detached observation he might apply to a business meeting. Only when Liam spoke did something shift in his expression, a fondness that made him seem almost human. "So, Simone," Liam said as they waited for dessert, "what do you do when you're not being the picture-perfect wife to this corporate robot?" "I read," she said simply, then smiled. "A lot, actually. Your library is incredible." "That was my mother's doing," William interjected warmly. "Isabella believed a house without books was just a building." "She sounds like she was wonderful," Simone said softly. "She was." William's voice grew tender. "She would have loved you, my dear. You have her grace." Jordan's fork clattered against his plate, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "If you'll excuse me," he said, standing abruptly. "I have calls to return." He left without another word, and the remaining 3 sat in uncomfortable silence until Liam spoke. "He still can't talk about her," he said quietly to William. "Even after all these years?" "Jordan loved his mother very much," William explained to Simone. Perhaps too much. When she died, he decided that loving anyone that deeply was too dangerous. That's why he's never... Simone started, then stopped herself. Never what? Liam asked gently. Never seemed to believe in love, she finished quietly. Liam and William exchanged a look that held years of shared concern for Jordan. He believes in it, Liam said finally. He's just terrified of it. There's a difference. After dinner, William retired early, leaving Simone and Liam alone in the sitting room. She'd intended to excuse herself as well, but there was something about Liam's easy conversation that made her want to stay. "Can I ask you something?" he said as they settled into the comfortable chairs by the fireplace. "Of course. Are you happy?" The question was so direct, so honest, that it took her breath away. No one had asked her that since the wedding. Not her mother, not Maria, certainly not Jordan. She started, then stopped. "I'm adjusting. That's not what I asked." She looked into the fire, watching the flames dance while she considered her answer. "No," she said finally. "I'm not happy, but I'm not miserable either. I'm just existing. That's no way to live. It's the way I have to live." Liam was quiet for a long moment. "You know, in all my letters home, Jordan never once mentioned that he was getting married. I found out from my mother, who heard it from someone at the country club. It wasn't exactly a love story," Simone said with a bitter laugh. "Maybe not, but looking at him tonight, watching the way he kept glancing at you when he thought no one was looking, he was making sure I didn't embarrass him." "No," Liam said firmly. "He was making sure you were okay. There's a difference." Simone looked at him skeptically. "You see things that aren't there." "Do I?" Liam smiled. "I've known Jordan Henderson since we were 7 years old. I've seen him through his mother's death, his father's illness, every major moment of his life, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you tonight." "How did he look at me?" "Like he was afraid you might disappear if he looked away too long." As Simone climbed the stairs to her lonely room in the guest wing that night, she couldn't stop thinking about Liam's words, and wondering if there was more to her distant husband than the cold businessman he pretended to be. Some walls take years to build and only seconds to crack. The Henderson mansion felt different with Liam Carter's presence filling its halls. For the first time since her wedding, Simone found herself looking forward to mornings instead of dreading the empty hours that stretched ahead. Liam had a gift for turning ordinary moments into small adventures, suggesting they explore the old carriage house behind the main building, or convincing Maria to teach them how to make her famous tres leches cake. It had been 4 days since the family dinner, and Jordan had maintained his usual schedule of early departures and late returns, but this morning was different. This morning, Simone woke to the sound of voices drifting up from the kitchen, Jordan's measured tones, mixed with Liam's animated storytelling. She dressed quickly in jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, curious about what could possibly keep Jordan from his usual rushed exit to the office. When she reached the kitchen, she found both men seated at the breakfast bar, coffee cups in hand, engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. "Morning," she said softly, not wanting to interrupt. Jordan looked up, and for a moment their eyes met with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was dressed more casually than usual, dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his blue eyes seem even more striking. Without the armor of his business suits, he looked younger, more approachable. "Good morning," he replied, his voice gentler than she expected. "I was just telling Liam about the Morrison acquisition, which sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry," Liam interjected with a grin. "But apparently it's going to revolutionize something or other." "It's going to revolutionize sustainable energy storage," Jordan said, with what might have been amusement. "Not everything has to be exciting to be important," says the man who once spent 3 hours explaining the poetry of quarterly reports. Liam shot back. "That was one time and you were drunk." "I had to be drunk to listen to 3 hours about quarterly reports." Simone found herself smiling as she poured her coffee, surprised by this glimpse of Jordan engaging in playful banter. She'd never seen him this relaxed, this human. "What about you, Simone?" Liam asked, turning his attention to her. "Any exciting plans for today? Or are you going to let these beautiful autumn days waste away in the library?" "The library doesn't feel like wasting away," she defended, settling onto a stool across from them. "But when was the last time you did something just for fun?" Liam pressed. "Something spontaneous?" Simone considered the question seriously. "I honestly can't remember." "That settles it," Liam declared, slapping his palm on the marble counter. "Today is a mandatory fun day. Jordan, cancel your meetings." "I can't just cancel it. You can and you will. When was the last time you took a day off? And I mean a real day off, not one of those working from home days where you're still glued to your phone. Jordan opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. Simone watched the internal struggle play out across his features, the responsible businessman warring with something else, something that wanted to say yes. Fine, he said finally. One day. Excellent. Liam rubbed his hands together like he was planning a military campaign. I was thinking we could visit that apple orchard about an hour north of here. Perfect day for it. Sunshine, cool air, and they have this incredible cider that'll make you forget all about quarterly reports. An hour later, they found themselves driving through Connecticut countryside in Jordan's Range Rover, autumn foliage painting the landscape in brilliant oranges and reds. Simone sat in the passenger seat, acutely aware of Jordan's hands on the steering wheel, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way he seemed to relax with each mile they put between themselves and the city. Liam kept up a steady stream of commentary from the back seat, pointing out particularly beautiful trees and making outrageous claims about his apple-picking prowess that had both Simone and Jordan laughing despite themselves. I once picked 30 pounds of apples in under an hour, Liam declared as they pulled into the orchard's gravel parking lot. That's impossible, Jordan said, turning off the engine. Is it? Or are you just jealous of my superior fruit-gathering abilities? I'm going to time you, Simone said with a smile. 30 pounds in an hour. Let's see what you've got. The riverside orchard was everything autumn was supposed to be. Rows of apple trees stretched as far as the eye could see, their branches heavy with red and golden fruit. Families wandered between the trees with wicker baskets. Children shrieked with delight as they discovered the perfect apple, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of ripe fruit and wood smoke from the cider house. They collected their baskets and headed into the orchard, Liam immediately launching into his apple-picking strategy, while Jordan shook his head in amused disbelief. Simone found herself caught between them, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Here, Jordan said quietly, appearing beside her as she reached for an apple just out of reach. Without asking, he placed his hands on her waist and lifted her slightly, bringing the apple within easy grasp. The moment seemed to suspend itself in amber. His hands were warm and strong through her sweater. His face was close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. She could feel his breath against her cheek, could see something shift in his expression that made her pulse race. "Got it," she whispered, holding up the apple. "Good," he said, but he didn't immediately let go of her waist. They stood there, suspended in the golden afternoon light, something unspoken passing between them. "Hey, lovebirds!" Liam's voice shattered the moment. "Less gazing into each other's eyes, more apple-picking. I have a reputation to maintain here." Jordan immediately stepped back, his expression closing off again, but Simone caught the faint flush across his cheekbones before he turned away. They spent the next 2 hours wandering through the orchard, filling their baskets and engaging in increasingly ridiculous competitions. Liam's apple-picking claims proved to be greatly exaggerated, much to Jordan's satisfaction. Simone discovered that Jordan had an unexpected competitive streak when it came to finding the perfect apple, examining each one with the same attention to detail he probably applied to corporate acquisitions. "You realize they're just apples, right?" she teased as he rejected another perfectly good specimen. "There's no point in doing something if you're not going to do it right," he replied seriously, then caught her expression and smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Okay, maybe I'm being slightly obsessive." "Slightly?" That smile again, wider this time. "Fine. Extremely obsessive. It's a character flaw." "I wouldn't call it a flaw," she said softly. "I'd call it thorough." Their eyes met again, and this time neither of them looked away immediately. There was something building between them, something that had nothing to do with contracts or family obligations, and everything to do with the way he'd lifted her to reach that apple, the way he'd smiled when she teased him. "Jordan," Liam called from several rows over, "come settle an argument between me and this 8-year-old about the proper apple-to-weight ratio." The spell broke, and Jordan looked away, but not before Simone saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip. Confusion, want, fear. As they walked back toward the cider house as the sun began to set, their baskets full and their cheeks flushed from the cool air, Simone realized that something fundamental had shifted today. The stranger she'd married was still there, but underneath the careful control, she'd glimpsed someone else entirely. Someone who lifted her up to reach the things she couldn't grasp on her own. Someone who might be worth fighting for. But as they drove home through the gathering darkness, None of them realized that some of the most beautiful moments are also the most dangerous, especially when the heart starts to remember what it feels like to hope. The hardest prisons to escape are the ones we build for ourselves. The week following their impromptu apple orchard trip had settled into an unexpected rhythm. Jordan still left early and returned late, but now he lingered over morning coffee, engaging in conversations that went beyond mere logistics. Liam had extended his stay indefinitely, claiming he needed time to decompress from European culture shock, though Simone suspected he was more interested in the dynamics unfolding in the Henderson household. It was Thursday evening when everything shifted. Simone was in the library, curled up in her favorite chair with a worn copy of Jane Austen, when she heard the front door slam with unusual force. Heavy footsteps echoed through the marble foyer, followed by Jordan's voice, sharp and frustrated in a way she'd never heard before. "Damn it, Liam, you don't understand. This isn't some romantic comedy where everything works out because people want it to." "No," came Liam's calmer response. "It's real life, which means it might actually work out better than any movie ever could." Simone set down her book, her heart beginning to race. They were talking about her. She could feel it in the tension that carried even through the closed library door. "She deserves better than this." Jordan's voice was closer now, probably in the sitting room adjacent to the library. "Better than a marriage that started as a business transaction. Better than a husband who doesn't know how to what? Love her." The silence that followed was deafening. Simone pressed her hand to her mouth, hardly daring to breathe. "I don't know how to love anyone," Jordan said finally, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it. "I tried with Amelia, and look how that ended." Amelia. Simone felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy at this unknown woman's name. "That was different," Liam said firmly. Amelia was perfect on paper, beautiful, educated, from the right family, everything my father wanted for me. And I couldn't make it work because I'm fundamentally broken when it comes to emotional intimacy." "You're not broken, you're scared. There's a difference." "Is there?" Jordan's laugh was bitter. "Because from where I'm standing, the result looks the same. Simone is kind, intelligent, beautiful, everything any man could want, and I'm treating her like a stranger because I'm too much of a coward to risk actually caring about her." Simone's heart hammered against her ribs. She should walk away, should give them privacy, but she couldn't make herself move. "So change," Liam said simply. "Stop treating her like she's going to disappear if you let yourself care about her." "What if she does disappear? What if I let myself fall for her and then you'll have lived, really lived, instead of just existing in this emotional fortress you've built." Footsteps moved across the sitting room, and Simone heard the distinctive sound of a glass being filled, probably brandy from Jordan's private collection. "You saw her at the orchard," Jordan said, after a long pause. "The way she laughed, the way she looked when the sun was in her hair. She's not meant for this cold, empty existence. She's meant for someone who can give her everything she deserves." "Someone like who?" "Someone like you." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Simone felt her world tilt sideways. "What?" Liam's voice was sharp with surprise. "Don't pretend you haven't noticed how perfect you two are together. The easy conversation, the shared laughter. You make her smile in a way I never have." "Jordan, I've seen the way she looks at you, Liam. Like you're everything bright and warm that's missing from her life. And maybe that's how it should be." "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" "You're everything I'm not. Spontaneous, emotionally available, capable of making someone happy without destroying them in the process. And you're everything I'm not. Stable, dependable, the kind of man who builds empires instead of just admiring them." Another silence, this one filled with years of friendship and understanding. "Besides," Liam continued, his voice gentler now, "you're wrong about how she looks at you." "What do you mean?" "At the orchard, when you lifted her to reach that apple, I saw her face, Jordan. That wasn't gratitude or polite appreciation. That was a woman falling for her husband." Simone's cheeks burned as she remembered that moment, Jordan's hands on her waist, the way the world had seemed to stop spinning. "You're imagining things." "I'm really not. And if you keep pushing her away, you're going to lose something real before you even give yourself a chance to find out what it could be." The sound of movement indicated one of them was leaving the room. Simone quickly returned to her chair and picked up her book, trying to look absorbed in reading when Jordan appeared in the library doorway. He stood there for a long moment, studying her in the soft lamplight. She could feel his gaze like a physical touch, could sense the internal war being fought behind his carefully controlled expression. "Simone," he said finally. "Yes?" She looked up, hoping her voice sounded normal. We need to talk." Her heart hammered. About what? He stepped into the room, moving closer to her chair. In the lamplight, she could see the exhaustion in his features, the weight of whatever had triggered tonight's conversation with Liam. About us. About this marriage. About what we're doing here. Okay, she said softly, closing her book and setting it aside. He ran a hand through his dark hair, disturbing its usual perfect styling. I know this isn't what you wanted. I know this whole situation is far from ideal. Jordan, let me finish, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I need to say this. She nodded, waiting. When we got married, I thought I could keep everything compartmentalized. Marriage as a business arrangement. Emotions as a separate entity that wouldn't interfere. But these past few weeks, he trailed off, seeming to struggle with the words. These past few weeks, I've watched you turn this house into something that feels like a home. I've seen you laugh with my father, tease Liam, show kindness to Maria, and I've realized that I've been so afraid of making the same mistakes I made before that I haven't even tried to make this work. What mistakes? She asked quietly. His jaw tightened. There was someone else before you, Amelia Preston. We were engaged for 6 months. Simone felt that stab of jealousy again, sharper this time. What happened? I happened, he said, with bitter self-recrimination. I was so focused on making sure our relationship fit the perfect mold that I never actually connected with her as a person. She said I treated her like a beautiful object instead of a partner. She wasn't wrong. That doesn't mean... It means I have a pattern of failing at relationships, he interrupted, and I don't want to fail you too. So your solution is to not try at all? The question hung between them, challenging and vulnerable at the same time. I don't know, he admitted. I honestly don't know what I'm doing anymore. Simone stood up, closing the distance between them until she was close enough to see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes, close enough to catch the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the brandy on his breath. Maybe, she said softly, we could figure it out together. For a moment she thought he might reach for her. His hand twitched at his side, his breathing grew shallow, and something raw and hungry flickered across his features. Then his phone buzzed with an incoming message, shattering the moment like glass hitting concrete. He stepped back, checking the screen with practiced efficiency. I have to take this, he said, his professional mask sliding back into place. Conference call with Tokyo in 10 minutes, and just like that the walls were back up. As Jordan disappeared into his home office and Simone returned to her empty room, neither of them realized that some conversations once started refuse to stay unfinished. Sometimes the most dangerous moments are the ones that feel like coming home. 3 days had passed since that almost conversation in the library, and Jordan had retreated so far behind his professional facade that Simone wondered if she'd imagined the vulnerability she'd glimpsed. He left earlier, returned later, and when their paths did cross, he spoke to her with the polite distance of a stranger staying in the same hotel. But Liam noticed everything. He's running scared, Liam told her as they walked through the mansion's gardens on Saturday morning. The autumn air was crisp enough to require jackets, and their breath formed small clouds as they talked. I've seen him do this before. Anytime something gets too real, too close to actual emotion, he bolts. Maybe he's right to run, Simone said, kicking at the fallen leaves scattered across the stone path. Maybe trying to make something real out of this arrangement is just setting us both up for disappointment. Or maybe, Liam said, stopping to face her, you're both too afraid to admit that you're falling for each other. The words hit her like a physical blow. I'm not, aren't you? His green eyes were kind but unflinching. Simone, I've watched you for 2 weeks now. The way you light up when he walks into a room, even when he's being his most impossible self. The way you worry when he works too late. The way you look at him when you think no one's watching. How do I look at him? Like you're seeing something the rest of the world misses. Like you know there's more to him than the cold businessman he pretends to be. They resumed walking, the gravel crunching beneath their feet. In the distance they could see Thomas working in the rose garden, preparing the plants for winter. And how does he look at me? She asked quietly. Like he's drowning, and your air. The simple honesty of it stole her breath. They walked in comfortable silence for several minutes before Liam spoke again. There's something you should know about the Amelia situation. Simone's step faltered. Jordan told me about her. Did he tell you why she really left? He said he treated her like an object instead of a partner. Liam snorted. That's what he tells himself because it's easier than the truth. What's the truth? The truth is that Amelia left because she realized Jordan would never love her the way he loved his mother. She was competing with a ghost, and she knew she couldn't win. They paused beside a small fountain, its water catching the morning sunlight like scattered diamonds. When Isabella Henderson died, Jordan didn't just lose his mother. He lost his faith in love itself. He watched his father fall apart, watched a man who'd built an empire crumble because the woman he adored was gone. Jordan decided that kind of vulnerability was too dangerous. But that's not love, Simone protested. That's obsession. Exactly. But try telling that to a 22-year-old who just watched his hero break. Liam picked up a pebble and tossed it into the fountain. The irony is that by trying to protect himself from that kind of pain, he's guaranteed he'll never experience that kind of joy either. And you think I can change that? I think you already are changing it, whether you realize it or not. They headed back toward the house, where Maria was waiting on the terrace with a tray of hot coffee and fresh pastries. "Mr. Henderson called," Maria announced as they approached. "He's bringing a client for lunch. Something about showing off the family home." Simone felt her stomach tighten. Jordan conducting business from their home meant she'd be expected to play the part of the perfect wife, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that performance today. "What kind of client?" Liam asked, settling into one of the terrace chairs. "Some big developer from California. Mr. Henderson wants everything perfect. Best china, formal dining room, the works." An hour later, Simone was in her room trying to decide between 3 different outfits when she heard cars pulling up the circular drive. Through her window, she watched Jordan emerge from a black sedan, followed by a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit. She'd settled on a navy dress that was professional but feminine, paired with pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who could convincingly play the role of a successful man's wife. The question was whether she wanted to keep playing that role forever. She found them in the sitting room, Jordan and his client engaged in what appeared to be serious conversation about market projections and development timelines. Jordan looked up when she entered, and something flickered across his features before he stood. "Mr. Davidson, I'd like you to meet my wife, Simone." Robert Davidson was the kind of man who commanded attention, probably in his early 60s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. "Mrs. Henderson, it's a pleasure. Jordan's told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," she replied with the kind of polished charm her mother had taught her. "He mentioned you're quite the reader. I have a daughter about your age who's always got her nose in a book. Drives her mother crazy." The lunch conversation flowed smoothly, with Jordan displaying a side of himself Simone had rarely seen. Charming, engaging, the kind of man who could convince anyone to trust him with their fortune. She played her part perfectly, asking intelligent questions about Davidson's projects, sharing carefully edited stories about their courtship that made their marriage sound like a romantic fairy tale instead of a business arrangement. But it was exhausting. After Davidson left, promising to have his lawyers review Jordan's proposal, Simone excused herself to the garden, needing air and space to shed the performance she'd just given. She was sitting on the stone bench beneath the old oak tree when Jordan found her. "Thank you," he said, settling beside her without asking permission. "For lunch, you were perfect." "Perfect," she repeated with a bitter laugh. "Is that what we're aiming for, perfection? Simone, do you know what I was thinking during that entire meal?" She turned to face him, her dark eyes bright with unshed tears. "I was thinking about how easy it would be to keep doing this forever, playing the perfect wife, having the perfect conversations, living in this perfect house with a perfect husband who treats me like an accessory to his perfect life. That's not, isn't it?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Because that's exactly what Amelia meant, isn't it? When she said you treated her like an object instead of a partner." Jordan's face went white. "How do you know about—" "It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that I'm not going to become her. I'm not going to spend my life competing with a ghost or settling for a marriage that looks perfect from the outside but feels like dying on the inside." She stood to leave, but Jordan caught her hand, his fingers wrapping around her wrist with gentle insistence. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't walk away. Give me one good reason to stay." For a long moment they stared at each other, the October wind stirring the leaves around them. Then Jordan did something that surprised them both. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her palm, soft and reverent. "Because," he said against her skin, "for the first time in my life I'm more afraid of losing someone than I am of loving them." And as the words hung between them like a bridge, neither of them was sure they were brave enough to cross. Both Jordan and Simone realized that some lines, once crossed, change everything. The most beautiful beginnings often come disguised as endings. The kiss to her palm had changed everything and nothing. In the days that followed, Jordan didn't retreat as Simone had expected. Instead, he seemed to be testing the waters of this new territory they'd stumbled into, lingering conversations over morning coffee, shared glances that lasted a heartbeat longer than necessary, his hand brushing hers when he passed her the newspaper. But it was Tuesday evening when the careful balance they'd been maintaining finally shifted. Simone was in the kitchen, attempting to recreate Maria's famous tres leches cake recipe. As a surprise for William's birthday the next day, flour dusted her navy sweater, and she had a streak of vanilla extract on her cheek, but she was determined to master at least one domestic skill in her new life. "That smells incredible," came Jordan's voice from the doorway. She turned to find him leaning against the frame, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, the most casual she'd ever seen him during what would normally be working hours. "You're home early," she observed, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at the sight of him. "Finished the Morrison deal this afternoon. Thought I'd celebrate by actually eating dinner at home for once." He moved into the kitchen, and she became acutely aware of the domestic intimacy of the scene, her cooking while he watched, the warm light from the pendant lamps casting everything in golden hues, the faint scent of vanilla and cinnamon in the air. "Can I help?" he asked, stopping beside her at the counter. "Do you know how to cook?" "I know how to order takeout and make coffee. Does that count?" His self-deprecating smile made her laugh. "Not really, but you can be my taste tester." She dipped a clean spoon into the cake batter and held it out to him. Instead of taking the spoon, Jordan leaned forward and let her feed him the sample, his lips closing around the utensil while his eyes held hers. The simple act felt shockingly intimate, and Simone's breath caught as he straightened, considering the taste with mock seriousness. "Verdict?" she asked, proud that her voice sounded steady. "Definitely needs more vanilla," he said with a slight smile, "and maybe a little more of the baker's personal touch." Before she could ask what he meant, he reached out and gently brushed the streak of vanilla extract from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was soft, reverent, and when his hand lingered against her face, Simone felt herself leaning into the warmth of his palm. "Simone," he said quietly, her name sounding different in his voice, rougher, more vulnerable. "Yes? I've been thinking about what you said in the garden, about not wanting to live a perfect life that feels like dying inside." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "The truth is, I've been dying inside for years. Long before you came into my life, I just got so good at it that I forgot what living actually felt like." His thumb traced along her cheekbone, and she saw something raw and honest in his blue eyes that made her heart race. "But these past few weeks, watching you in my house, sharing meals with you, seeing you laugh with my father and challenge Liam to ridiculous apple-picking competitions, you've made me remember." "Remember what?" "What it feels like to want something more than success, more than safety, more than the perfect image I've spent my entire adult life constructing." The cake timer chose that moment to go off, its shrill beeping shattering the tension between them. But neither of them moved, both seemingly caught in the gravity of what was happening. "Jordan," she whispered. "I know this is complicated," he said, his hand still cupping her face. "I know our marriage started as an arrangement, and I know I've given you every reason to keep your distance, but The sound of the front door opening echoed through the house, followed by Liam's cheerful voice calling out that he'd brought dinner from that Italian place downtown. Jordan immediately stepped back, the moment broken as abruptly as if someone had thrown cold water over them both. Simone turned toward the oven, her hands shaking slightly as she removed the cake layers. "We should," Jordan started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Yeah," she agreed quietly, not sure what they should do, but understanding that whatever had been building between them would have to wait. Dinner with Liam was a study in unspoken tension. Liam, oblivious to what he'd interrupted, regaled them with stories about his afternoon exploring local art galleries, while Jordan and Simone carefully avoided looking directly at each other. But Simone could feel Jordan's awareness of her like a physical presence, the way his breath caught when she laughed at one of Liam's stories, how his hand tightened around his wine glass when Liam complimented her on how beautiful she looked in the kitchen lighting. "You two seem different tonight," Liam observed over dessert, store-bought tiramisu since Simone's cake needed to cool overnight. "Different how?" Jordan asked with practiced casualness. "I don't know. Like you're both thinking about something else entirely." "Maybe we are," Simone said quietly, meeting Jordan's eyes across the table. The look that passed between them was electric, full of unfinished conversations and promises neither of them was quite ready to make. Later that evening, after Liam had retired to his room and Simone was heading upstairs to hers, Jordan caught her hand on the landing. "We need to finish what we started in the kitchen," he said simply. "Do we?" "Yes, because I think we both know we're standing at a crossroads here, and we can't keep pretending we're not." She turned to face him fully, struck by how young he looked in the soft hallway lighting, how uncertain despite his confident words. "What are you saying, Jordan?" "I'm saying that I want to try, really try, not just the arrangement our families made, but something real between us. And if it doesn't work, if we try and fail, then at least we'll know we were brave enough to try." He lifted her hand, the same one he'd kissed in the garden, and pressed it flat against his chest, over his heart. She could feel the rapid rhythm beneath her palm, could see the vulnerability he was finally allowing her to witness. "I can't promise I'll be good at this," he said quietly. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes or retreat when things get difficult, but I can promise that I want to learn how to love you the way you deserve to be loved." Simone felt tears prick her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. This was the man she'd glimpsed in moments, the one who lifted her to reach apples, who worried about his father, who was brave enough to admit his fears. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let's try." For a moment, they stood there in the quiet hallway, her hand over his heart, both of them understanding that they'd just crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Then Jordan leaned down and kissed her forehead, soft, reverent, full of promises he wasn't quite ready to voice, but that she felt in every tender touch. "Good night, Simone. Good night, Jordan." As they separated to go to their respective rooms, both of them carrying the weight of new possibilities, neither realized that some of the most important conversations happen in kitchens at sunset, and that some promises are made not with words, but with the simple courage to stay and try. The cruelest irony of love is that it often arrives just when someone else decides they deserve it too. The shift in the Henderson household was subtle but unmistakable. Jordan and Simone moved around each other with a new awareness, their conversations carrying undercurrents that hadn't existed before. Small touches became frequent, a hand on her lower back as he passed behind her chair, her fingers briefly covering his when he handed her coffee, stolen glances that lasted heartbeats longer than propriety suggested. William noticed first, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction whenever he caught them in these small intimacies. "About time," he murmured to Simone one afternoon, as they watched Jordan explain something to the gardeners with unusual patience. But it was Liam who noticed the most dangerous change of all. 3 weeks had passed since that conversation in the hallway, and Jordan had kept his promise to try. He came home earlier, lingered over meals, and made an effort to share pieces of his day that went beyond mere logistics. For the first time since their wedding, Simone felt like she was married to a partner rather than a polite stranger. She should have been completely happy. The problem was, Liam Carter had extended his stay indefinitely, and somewhere in the comfortable rhythm of their daily interactions, something had shifted for him too. It started with small things, the way he looked at her when she laughed, how he found excuses to seek her out when Jordan was working, the increasingly personal nature of their conversations. Simone told herself she was imagining the change, that Liam was simply being his naturally warm, engaging self. Until the evening everything came to a head. Jordan was in Seattle again, another late-night negotiation session that would keep him away overnight. Simone had grown accustomed to these trips, but tonight felt different. Tonight she missed him in a way that ached. She was in the library trying to lose herself in a novel when Liam appeared in the doorway with 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you might want company," he said, settling into the chair across from hers. "That's thoughtful, thank you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the soft crackling of the fire and the occasional turn of a page. But Simone could feel Liam watching her, could sense something building in the quiet space between them. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Of course. Are you happy? I mean really happy, not just adjusting or making the best of things." The question caught her off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because I care about you. Because in the past month, you've become important to me in a way I didn't expect." Something in his tone made her set down her book and look at him directly. What she saw in his green eyes made her breath catch. Not friendship, not casual affection, but something deeper and infinitely more complicated. "Liam, I know," he said quickly. "I know this is complicated. I know you're married to my best friend. But I also know that when I look at you, I see someone who deserves to be cherished, not just appreciated. Jordan does cherish me." Does he? Or does he just finally appreciate what he has? The distinction felt important, though Simone wasn't sure why. "He's trying," she said quietly. "We both are. I know he is. And I can see that you care about him. But Simone, Liam leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. When was the last time someone looked at you and saw everything they wanted? Not everything they needed, not everything that made sense, but everything that made their world brighter just by existing? The words hit her like a physical blow, because the truth was no one had ever looked at her that way. Her parents loved her but saw her as a solution to their problems. Jordan was learning to care for her but still seemed surprised by his own feelings. But Liam looked at her like she was sunshine breaking through clouds. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "I know, believe me. I know how unfair this is. Do you think I wanted to fall for my best friend's wife? Do you think I plan to care about you so much that it keeps me awake at night?" He stood up, moving to the window where he could look out at the garden without looking at her. "I've tried to leave, Simone. I've booked flights to London, to Paris, to anywhere that would put distance between us. But I can't make myself go, because the thought of not seeing you smile, not hearing you laugh, not being able to talk with you about everything and nothing." He turned back to face her, and the raw honesty in his expression made her heart race. "I'm in love with you," he said simply, "completely, hopelessly, destructively in love with you. And I know it's wrong, and I know it complicates everything, but I couldn't keep pretending anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Simone felt like the world had tilted off its axis, like everything she thought she understood about her life had suddenly become uncertain. "I don't know what you want me to say," she whispered. "I want you to tell me I'm crazy. I want you to say that what's building between you and Jordan is so strong that my feelings don't matter. I want you to make this easy by saying you could never care about me the way I care about you." "Liam, but if you can't say those things, if there's even a small part of you that wonders what it would be like to be with someone who fell for you before he knew he was supposed to—" He trailed off, letting the implication hang between them. Simone stood up, her legs unsteady. "This is wrong. Jordan is your best friend. He trusts you." "I know. And that's what's killing me. Because he's a good man, and he's trying to be a good husband, and he deserves better than a friend who's falling apart because he can't stop thinking about his wife." "Then leave," she said, though the words felt like they were being torn from her throat. "Go back to Europe, go anywhere but here. Is that what you want?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility and consequence. Simone opened her mouth to say yes, to end this before it went any further, to protect the fragile new relationship she was building with Jordan. But the words wouldn't come, because the truth was more complicated than simple right and wrong. The truth was that Liam made her laugh in a way that felt effortless, that he looked at her like she was a gift rather than a responsibility, that being with him felt like breathing after holding her breath for months. And the truth was that while Jordan was learning to care for her, Liam already understood her. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't ask you to leave." The admission hung between them like a confession, and Simone saw something shift in Liam's expression. Hope mixed with anguish, want tempered by guilt. "Simone!" The sound of the front door opening echoed through the house, followed by Jordan's voice calling out that his meeting had ended early and he'd caught the last flight home. Both Liam and Simone froze, the reality of the situation crashing over them like cold water. They were alone in the library at nearly midnight, wine glasses between them, the air thick with unspoken confessions and impossible wants. "I should go," Liam said quickly, but Jordan's footsteps were already echoing in the hallway, coming closer. When Jordan appeared in the doorway, Simone was sitting in her chair with her book open, and Liam was standing by the fire. But something in the atmosphere must have struck Jordan as off, because his eyes moved between them with sudden sharpness. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Just keeping Simone company while you were away," Liam said with forced casualness. "You know how these big houses can feel empty at night." Jordan's gaze lingered on his friend's face, then moved to Simone. "Everything okay?" "Of course," she said, proud that her voice sounded steady. "How was Seattle?" "Productive. The Yamamoto deal closed ahead of schedule." But his attention wasn't on business victories. Something had changed in his expression, a wariness that hadn't been there before. As the three of them stood in the library, each carrying secrets that could shatter everything, none of them realized that some moments mark the end of innocence and the beginning of choices that will define everything that comes next. Sometimes, the most devastating storms arrive on the clearest days. The tension in the Henderson mansion over the next week was suffocating. Jordan had retreated into cold professionalism, watching Liam and Simone with the calculating gaze of a man piecing together a puzzle he didn't want to solve. Liam moved through the house like a man walking on glass, every gesture careful, every word measured. and Simone felt like she was drowning in the space between them. The breaking point came on a Friday evening that had started beautifully. William had been having one of his better days, strong enough to join them for dinner in the main dining room, instead of taking his meal in his suite. The conversation had been light, Liam sharing stories about a photography exhibition he'd visited downtown, Jordan actually laughing at one of his friend's ridiculous observations about modern art. For a moment, it felt like the easy camaraderie they'd shared before everything became complicated. "You know," William said as Maria served dessert, "this is the happiest I've seen this house in years. Isabella would have loved having you all here together." The comment was innocent, meant as a compliment, but Simone saw something flicker across Jordan's face at the mention of his mother. "Dad," Jordan said quietly, "maybe we should—" "What? I can't mention your mother anymore. She loved this house when it was full of laughter and young people and possibility." William's eyes moved between the three of them. She would have adored Simone, would have been thrilled to see Liam finally settling down instead of wandering around Europe avoiding commitment. "Dad. And she would have been over the moon to see you finally learning to let someone pass those walls you've built, son." The words hung in the air, well-intentioned, but somehow hitting every nerve at the table. Jordan's jaw tightened, Liam shifted uncomfortably, and Simone felt the familiar weight of being discussed rather than included. "Actually," Liam said suddenly, setting down his fork, "there's something I need to tell you all." The tone of his voice made everyone look up sharply. Simone felt her heart begin to race. "I've decided to go back to London. Permanently this time." "What?" William's face fell. "But you just got back." "We thought—" "I know what you thought, and I'm grateful for the welcome, but it's time for me to stop running from my real life and actually build something meaningful." Jordan was studying his friend's face with laser intensity. "This is sudden." "Not really, I've been thinking about it for weeks." "Since when?" The question hung heavy with subtext, and Simone saw Liam's throat work as he swallowed. "Since I realized that some situations become impossible if you stay too long." The silence that followed was deafening. William looked confused, but Jordan's expression was growing darker by the second as understanding dawned. "Impossible how?" Jordan asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Jordan," Simone started, but he held up a hand to stop her. "No, I want to hear this. Impossible how, Liam?" Liam met his friend's gaze directly, and Simone saw years of friendship warring with something else in his green eyes. "Impossible because sometimes you realize you want something you can't have, something that belongs to someone else." "Something," Jordan repeated slowly. "Or someone." The accusation hung between them like a blade. William looked between his son and Liam with growing alarm, finally understanding that this wasn't about career choices or wanderlust. "Boys," he said carefully, "perhaps we should—" "Someone," Liam said quietly, answering Jordan's question. "Someone I care about more than I should. Someone who deserves better than being caught in the middle of a situation that was never fair to begin with." Jordan's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. "Get out. Jordan, please. Get out of my house now. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Jordan's voice was ice cold, but Simone could see the pain underneath. "My best friend, the man I've trusted with everything, falls for my wife and thinks the solution is to announce it over dinner like it's some romantic gesture. It's not like that, isn't it? You've been here for 2 months, Liam. 2 months of watching her, talking to her, making her laugh in ways I never could. Did you think I was blind?" Simone felt like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. "Jordan, stop. This isn't what?" He turned his attention to her, and the betrayal in his blue eyes made her feel sick. "This isn't exactly what it looks like. You haven't been falling for him while I was trying to figure out how to be a decent husband? That's not fair." "Fair?" Jordan's laugh was bitter. "Was it fair when you sat in that library with him, drinking wine and talking about everything you wished your life could be? Was it fair when you looked at him like he was everything I'm not?" "I never said that. You didn't have to say it. It's written all over your face every time he walks into a room." The words hit her like physical blows, partly because they carried enough truth to sting. "Jordan," William said firmly, "that's enough." "No, Dad, it's not enough." "Because I was finally starting to believe—" His voice cracked slightly. "I was starting to believe that maybe I could learn how to make her happy, that maybe this arrangement could become something real." "It is real," Simone said desperately. "What we've been building these past weeks, it's real. Is it? Or were you just settling for me because you thought he wasn't an option?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. And in the moment of silence that followed, Simone realized with devastating clarity that she didn't know the answer. Jordan saw her hesitation and something died in his expression. "That's what I thought," he said quietly. "Jordan, wait!" But he was already walking toward the door. He paused in the doorway, his back to all of them. "Liam's right about one thing," he said without turning around. "This situation is impossible, and maybe it's time we all stopped pretending otherwise." The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house like a gunshot. In the silence that followed, William looked between Simone and Liam with something approaching despair. "What have you children done?" he whispered. Simone felt tears streaming down her face, but she couldn't find her voice to answer. Because the truth was she didn't know what they'd done, only that it felt like everything was falling apart, and she wasn't sure any of them knew how to put it back together. Liam reached for her hand across the table, and for a moment she let him take it. His fingers were warm and steady, offering comfort in the wreckage of what had just happened. But even as she accepted his touch, she couldn't stop thinking about the devastation in Jordan's eyes when he'd asked if she was settling for him, and she couldn't stop wondering if the answer might be yes. As the echoes of Jordan's departure faded into the night, the three people left behind realized that some truths once spoken can never be taken back, and some choices once made change everything forever. The bravest thing you can do is fight for something when you're not sure you deserve it. 3 days passed without a word from Jordan. 3 days of Simone wandering the empty halls of the Henderson mansion like a ghost, while Liam packed his belongings with the methodical precision of a man trying to outrun his mistakes. William watched them both with the weary sadness of someone who had seen too many love stories end badly. On the third night, Simone couldn't take the silence anymore. She found Liam in the guest room, folding clothes into an expensive leather suitcase that looked like it had traveled the world. "When do you leave?" she asked from the doorway. "Tomorrow morning, early flight to London." She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "Liam, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." He looked up from his packing, his green eyes wary. "Okay. If Jordan and I had never gotten married, if you'd met me under different circumstances, would you still feel the same way?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Liam set down the shirt he'd been folding and looked at her directly. "You're asking if I'm in love with you, or if I'm in love with the idea of wanting something I can't have?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "I think," he said finally, "that part of what drew me to you was watching you be strong and graceful in an impossible situation. But Simone, the way you make me laugh, the way you see the world, the way you care about people even when they don't deserve it, that has nothing to do with Jordan or marriage or forbidden anything. That's just you. And if I said I wanted to try? If I said I'd leave with you?" Hope flickered across his features before he carefully suppressed it. "I'd say that running away from problems rarely solves them. And I'd say that you're asking the wrong person the wrong question." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've seen the way you look when Jordan walks into a room, even when you're angry with him. I've seen how you light up when he actually opens up to you, and I've seen how much it hurt you when he accused you of settling." Simone felt tears prick her eyes. It hurt because he was right. Was he? Or did it hurt because he was wrong, and you realized it too late? The words hit her like a revelation. She sank into the chair by the window, her legs suddenly unsteady. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know anything anymore." "Yes, you do," Liam said gently. "You know exactly who you love. You've known for weeks. You're just scared to admit it because admitting it means you have to fight for it. What if it's too late? Then at least you'll know you tried." An hour later, Simone was standing outside Blackstone Tower, the gleaming skyscraper that housed Henderson Financial. It was nearly midnight, but she knew Jordan would be there. He always worked late when he was avoiding something, and right now, he was avoiding everything. The security guard recognized her and let her up without question. The elevator ride to the 38th floor felt like it lasted forever, giving her too much time to second-guess every decision that had led her to this moment. Jordan's corner office was lit by a single desk lamp, casting long shadows across the mahogany furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of the city. He was seated behind his desk, still in the same clothes he'd worn to dinner 3 days ago, looking like he hadn't slept since their confrontation. "You look terrible," she said from the doorway. He looked up, and the exhaustion in his blue eyes nearly broke her heart. "What are you doing here, Simone?" "I came to tell you that you were wrong." "About what?" "About me settling for you." She stepped into the office, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "About me wishing you were someone else." Jordan's expression didn't change, but she saw his hand tighten around the pen he'd been holding. "Were you? Settling?" "Yes," she said, and watched him flinch. "But not in the way you think." She moved closer to his desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I was settling for a marriage that felt safe. I was settling for polite conversations and careful distances because I thought that's all I deserved. I was settling for a version of you that kept his heart locked away because I was too scared to ask for more." "Simone, let me finish," she said, echoing his words from weeks ago. "I need to say this." He nodded, his gaze never leaving her face. "When Liam told me he loved me, it felt like coming up for air after drowning. Not because I loved him back, but because someone finally saw me as worth fighting for. Someone finally looked at me like I was a gift instead of an obligation." Jordan's face went pale, but she continued. "And for a moment, I thought maybe that was enough. Maybe being wanted was more important than being understood. Maybe passion was more important than partnership. And now I know that what I felt with Liam was beautiful, but it wasn't love. It was the idea of love. It was easy and safe and simple." She walked around the desk until she was standing directly in front of him, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his eyes, close enough to catch the familiar scent of his cologne. "But what I feel for you isn't any of those things. It's complicated and messy, and sometimes it scares me so much I can barely breathe. Simone, I love you, Jordan. Not the man you think you should be, not the perfect husband you're trying to become, but you. The man who works too late because he cares too much. The man who lifts me up to reach things I can't grasp on my own. The man who kisses my palm like it's something precious and tells me he's afraid of losing me." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't stop. "I love that you examine every apple like it's a corporate acquisition. I love that you remember how I take my coffee. I love that you're brave enough to try even when you're terrified of failing." Jordan stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "And if you can forgive me for being too scared to see it sooner, if you can forgive me for hurting you when you were finally brave enough to open your heart, then maybe we can stop settling for anything less than everything we could be together." For a moment they stood there in the soft lamplight, the city sprawling below them like a constellation of possibilities. Then Jordan reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I can't bear the thought of you with someone else," he said quietly. "Not because I own you, but because I love you so much. It feels like dying when I think about losing you. You're not going to lose me. Even though I'm difficult and stubborn and probably going to mess this up 100 more times, especially because of that." He laughed then, the sound raw and relieved and full of wonder. "I love you too, Simone. I love you so much I don't know what to do with all of it. We'll figure it out," she whispered. Together. When he kissed her, it wasn't the polite brush of lips from their wedding day or the reverent touch he'd given her palm. It was desperate and grateful and full of promises they were finally brave enough to make. When they broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Jordan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said softly. "We're already married. No, we went through a ceremony. But marry me, Simone. Choose me. Choose us. Choose this messy, complicated, beautiful thing we're building together." She looked into his eyes and saw everything she'd been afraid to hope for. Love without conditions, partnership without pretense, a future built on choice rather than obligation. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I choose you. I choose us." And as they held each other in the quiet of his office, surrounded by the evidence of the empire he'd built, but finally understanding that the most important thing he'd ever constructed was the courage to love without reservation, both Jordan and Simone realized that some stories don't end with happily ever after. They begin with it. 2 years later, some love stories begin with once upon a time. The best ones begin with once upon a choice. The Henderson mansion had never looked more beautiful than it did on this crisp October morning, 2 years after the night that changed everything. Golden sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating rooms that had been transformed from a museum of perfection into a home filled with laughter, arguments, compromises, and the 1,000 small intimacies that make a marriage real. Simone stood in the kitchen, flour dusting her burgundy sweater, as she attempted to recreate Maria's tres leches cake recipe for what had become an annual tradition, her wedding anniversary with Jordan. Not the anniversary of their arranged ceremony, but the anniversary of the night in his office when they'd chosen each other for real. "You're overthinking the meringue again," came Jordan's voice from behind her, warm with the kind of affectionate teasing that had become their language. She turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, coffee mug in hand, wearing jeans and a navy cable-knit sweater that made his blue eyes seem even more striking. At 37, he carried himself with the same confidence he'd always possessed, But there was something softer about him now, something that spoke of a man who'd learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was strength. "I am not overthinking," she protested, though they both knew she absolutely was. "I'm being thorough." He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to the curve of her neck that still made her breath catch. "Is that what we're calling it?" "We're calling it wanting to get it right this time. It was perfect last year. It was lopsided last year. Beautifully lopsided," he corrected, his voice soft against her ear. "Like us." She leaned back against his chest, marveling at how natural this felt now. The easy affection, the comfortable silence, the way they'd learned to fit together like pieces of a puzzle that had always been meant to connect. Through the kitchen windows, she could see the gardens where Thomas was planting spring bulbs, preparing for the beauty that would emerge after winter's end. It had become her favorite metaphor for what they'd built together, something that looked dead and buried on the surface, but was actually preparing for something magnificent. "Any word from Liam?" she asked, stirring the cake batter with perhaps more force than necessary. "He sent a postcard from Barcelona, says the art scene there is transcendent, whatever that means." Jordan's tone was carefully neutral, but Simone could hear the lingering complexity underneath. It had taken time, months of careful conversations and honest apologies, but Jordan and Liam had eventually found their way back to friendship. Not the easy camaraderie they'd shared before, but something deeper and more honest. Liam had been right when he'd said that some situations became impossible if you stayed too long, but he'd also discovered that some friendships were strong enough to survive even the most complicated truths. He'd visited once 6 months ago, staying for a long weekend that had been initially awkward, but ultimately healing. Watching him with Jordan and Simone together, seeing the obvious love and partnership they'd built, had seemed to give him the closure he'd needed to finally, truly move on. "He's happy," Jordan said, reading her thoughts. "Different than he was before, but happy." "Good," she said, and meant it. "He deserves to be happy. So do we." The simple statement carried the weight of everything they'd overcome. Not just the dramatic confrontation that had nearly destroyed them, but the smaller daily work of learning to love each other fully. The fights about Jordan's workaholic tendencies, the conversations about Simone's need for independence within their partnership, the gradual process of becoming partners instead of strangers, sharing a name. "Mrs. Henderson," came Maria's voice from the doorway, "your guest is here." Simone looked up to see William being wheeled in by his nurse, looking frailer than he had a year ago, but with eyes that still sparkled with mischief and affection. His health had been declining steadily, but he'd insisted on being present for what he called the real anniversary. "Dad," Jordan said warmly, releasing Simone to move toward his father. "You're supposed to be resting." "I'll have plenty of time to rest when I'm dead," William replied with characteristic bluntness. "Today I want to see my daughter-in-law attempt to recreate Maria's masterpiece." "Attempt?" Simone feigned outrage. "I'll have you know I've been practicing." "On my poor kitchen," Maria muttered good-naturedly, but her eyes were fond as she watched the family interaction. They'd become a family, Simone realized. Not the formal, carefully orchestrated version she'd imagined when she'd first walked into this house, but something messier and more real. Something built on choice and daily recommitment rather than obligation. As she slid the cake into the oven, Jordan moved to help his father settle into his favorite spot by the kitchen island, where he could oversee the proceedings with the satisfaction of a man watching his world continue beyond his own timeline. "You know," William said, accepting the coffee Jordan offered him, "your mother would have loved this." It was the first time in months that he'd mentioned Isabella without the conversation becoming heavy with old grief. Jordan's hand stilled for just a moment before he continued stirring sugar into his father's cup. "She would have loved Simone," William continued, his gaze moving to where she was cleaning flour from her hands. "Not just because you love her, but because she would have recognized something in her. The same strength, the same grace under pressure." "Dad, let me finish," William said gently. "I know it's taken me a long time to say this, but watching you two together has taught me something important about love." He paused, gathering his thoughts, and both Jordan and Simone found themselves holding their breath. "Your mother and I, we had a great love, the kind poets write about, but it was also fragile in some ways because it was built on need as much as want. I needed her so completely that when she was gone I forgot how to exist without that need." Jordan's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "But what you two have built, it's different, stronger. You choose each other every day, not because you can't survive alone, but because you don't want to. That's not just love, that's partnership. That's the kind of foundation that can weather anything. Simone felt tears prick her eyes as she understood what William was really saying, that he was proud of them, that he approved of what they'd created, and that he was finally at peace with his son's ability to love without the destructive intensity that had nearly broken his own heart. Besides, William added with a return to his usual mischief, she would have gotten a tremendous kick out of watching you learn to bake. The moment of heavy emotion broke into laughter, and Simone realized that this was what happiness looked like, not the dramatic declarations and grand gestures of romance novels, but the simple pleasure of being known and loved and accepted exactly as you were. An hour later, they sat around the kitchen table sharing cake that was only slightly lopsided and coffee that Jordan had made strong enough to wake the dead. The conversation flowed easily between topics that ranged from William's memories of the house's early days to Jordan's latest acquisition to Simone's plans for the literacy program she'd started at the local community center. She'd found her purpose gradually, not in some dramatic revelation, but in the slow realization that she wanted to use her position and resources to help others the way her family had once needed help. The program had started small, tutoring adults who'd never learned to read properly, but had grown into something that brought her deep satisfaction and gave her days structure and meaning beyond the role of wife. "I should probably head back upstairs," William said eventually, though his reluctance was obvious. "This old body needs more rest than it used to." As Jordan helped settle his father back in his suite, Simone found herself alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of their afternoon together. Dirty dishes, crumbs on the counter, coffee cups that still held warmth, the beautiful debris of a life lived fully. She wandered into the library, her old sanctuary now filled with books they'd chosen together and photographs from the trips they'd taken over the past 2 years. Paris, for their first real honeymoon. A cabin in Vermont, where Jordan had finally learned to relax completely. The beach house in South Carolina, where they'd spent last Christmas, just the two of them, learning to be quiet together without it feeling like absence. "Penny for your thoughts," Jordan said, finding her there as she'd known he would. "Just thinking about how different everything is." Different how? She turned to face him, this man who'd become her partner in the truest sense of the word. "Do you remember what you asked me that night in your office? You asked me to marry you, to choose you." "I remember. I've been thinking about that word, choose, because it's not something you do once, is it? It's something you do every day." Jordan moved closer, understanding where she was going with this. "Every morning when you bring me coffee made exactly the way I like it, you're choosing me. Every time you listen to me complain about the community center's funding issues, without trying to fix everything yourself, you're choosing me. Every time you let me see you frustrated or worried or uncertain, instead of hiding behind that perfect mask, you're choosing me. And every time you laugh at my terrible jokes," he said softly, "every time you call me on my workaholic tendencies, every time you trust me with your fears and dreams and the thousand small details that make you who you are, you're choosing me too." "Yes," she whispered. "Exactly." He reached for her hands, threading their fingers together with the same care he'd shown that first time in the apple orchard. "I used to think love was supposed to feel like drowning," he said. "Like something that swept you away and left you helpless. But this, what we have, it feels like learning to fly. Together, together." Outside, the autumn sun was beginning to set, painting the garden in shades of gold and amber. In a few hours, they'd have dinner, probably something simple that they'd cook together while debating the merits of various spice combinations. They'd talk about Jordan's day at the office and Simone's session with her adult literacy students. They'd probably argue about what to watch on television and compromise on something neither of them really wanted to see. It would be ordinary and perfect and real. "Jordan," she said softly. "Yes, ask me again." He knew immediately what she meant, his blue eyes growing warm with understanding and love, and the kind of certainty that came from 2 years of daily choosing. "Simone Henderson," he said, his voice soft but steady, "will you marry me? Will you choose this messy, complicated, beautiful life we're building together? Will you choose me, not just today but tomorrow and the day after that and all the days we're lucky enough to have?" She looked into his eyes and saw their whole future reflected there, the fights they'd have and resolve, the adventures they'd share, the quiet mornings and busy evenings, the children they might have someday, the way they'd grow old together while never stopping the daily choice that kept their love alive. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, with the kind of joy that could fill a mansion. "Yes, I choose you. I choose us. I choose this. When he kissed her, it was with the passion of new love and the depth of true partnership, and when they broke apart, both of them were smiling like people who just discovered the secret to happiness, because they had. The secret was simple. Love wasn't something that happened to you. Love was something you did every day with purpose and intention, and the kind of courage that turned contracts into commitments and arrangements into forever. And as the sun set over the Henderson mansion, filling their library with golden light, Simone and Jordan held each other close and marveled at the beautiful life they'd chosen to build together, one decision at a time. In the end, love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about choosing someone imperfect and deciding to build something beautiful together, day after day, choice after choice. Sometimes the greatest love stories don't begin with passion, they begin with courage. Would you have made the same choice? What did this story teach you about the difference between settling and choosing? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.